probably more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was
But
neat.
it's good stuff. Man, I love your background, John. I'm excited to talk to you about it. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate
Oh,
it.
sure, this is going to be a hoot, I think.
Yeah,
This one,
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So before we get into your work, I want to begin our conversation with 4 years ago, the world stopped on a dime with this pandemic. We were just coming to grips with it. How did you survive that time period and how did it change you?
well, those are good questions. How I survived it, I'm now retired, but I was teaching, and I've been very fortunate in that I had taught in an online class before the pandemic. It was an executive MBA class, so I kind of knew my way around the online world. And here at Mizzou, we flipped over from in-person to online in March of 2022. And so that was fairly, how I survived it was that I was just lucky that I had this prior experience. Um, Now, it's funny to think about the way it's changed me. I mean, I think in general, and I don't think this is worn off very much yet. It just makes me grateful for a couple of things like good health, although I have had COVID once, and social connections, which were so much, abbreviated or even halted during the pandemic. Just happy hours or meeting with colleagues about research or whatever. My gratitude for those things has increased, or my appreciation of them increased, and I don't think that's worn off. I still appreciate those things.
Yeah. It's funny how we were so connected digitally, but we all as human beings realized that that physical interaction was key to our survival.
You are absolutely right. Yeah. And I can tell you just briefly, I don't want to, sound like a complainer, but teaching an online class is not the same thing as teaching an in-person class for the very, as you just suggested. And I don't think it is from the student perspective either. And so we've largely gone back at Mizzou. I say they, I guess, since I'm retired, have largely gone back to in-person. But some programs that went online have stayed online. So,
S- So, I have a jazz radio show and there were so many musicians out there that were on one side or the other. They were okay with virtual or they were like, I didn't do it at all. And it's that notion. It's like you have to get in the room and you have to change the particles. You have to literally get in there and be a part because the crowd's a part of that whole energy interaction that goes into a live show.
oh, absolutely. I imagine there's some parallels, maybe not strong ones, but when you're in a classroom, you can read the body language, you can read their faces, you know they're bored, or you know that you're going too fast or whatever. And that's very hard to pick up on a Zoom,
Yeah.
especially when you've got, say 25 faces looking at you on one screen.
Yeah. So let's look at 2024 right now. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day, and one of the
Okay.
kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that
Okay.
child?
I'm going to give it a two-part, but ask a question a professor. We get long-winded. I know that. And that didn't end when I retired. So I would talk to a 3-year-old about being a professor, and which is essentially just being a teacher, and the kind of the value and the fun that comes from that, from connecting with students and having some notion that you've influenced at least a few of them for the better. In any classroom of 25 undergraduates, there are a few people that have no interest in being there. It just fit their schedule or something. But, there are some students there who want to learn and are eager to learn and actually come to office hours, physical office hours,
Yeah.
back when we had those and so forth. So I think, about being a teacher, and you could, to a third grader, you could probably expand that to other types of teaching, I mean, high school, community college, whatever. Just saying that in my experience, being a teacher has been a rewarding career. And so that's the first thing I think I would say to the third grader, not 3-year-old, third grader.
Yeah.
I think the second thing that I'd say is what I'm working on these days is studying how people think and how people make decisions. And it might be simple, I say to a third grader, it might be as simple as, how did you decide what to put on for clothes today before school? Now, maybe your mom or your dad selected that, and so you didn't have to decide. But maybe you had a choice at breakfast, and how did you make that? Now, these are relatively small decisions, bigger to a third grader than maybe the rest of us. And I would say, but generally, we make a lot of decisions every day, and I'm very interested in how people make decisions and what kinds of mistakes they may make when making decisions.
I saw a study at one point. I'm fascinated by how this idea of making decisions works. And they broke down how many decisions an average human makes a day, and it's astronomical.
I don't know the number, but I believe it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And
it is
it's
astronomical.
I mean, you just saying even clothes, like there's things that just kind of flip in my brain and I'm like, all right, that works. And it's like I'm not really putting that much thought into it, but there's so many things. Do I refill the cat bowl? Did they get enough?
Right.
There's all of these little things, or should I do this? And then you pop in your something pops in your brain that you're supposed to do, and later in the day you forgot to do it. It's like there's all of these near hits and misses and things that make up the architecture of our day.
Oh, absolutely. Now, one of the things you pointed out, we just have limited cognitive capacity. And so, if some of these are like semi-automated or not, you don't think about much, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I
Yeah.
mean, if you get up every morning and have, Raisin Bran for breakfast and you don't really think about it, I mean, that's not a bad outcome because then you've got some cognitive reserve left, for maybe a more important decision like what I'm going to say at the meeting or what artists do I want to play on my jazz show or whatever, which are probably more things. So, shortcuts and maybe lack of attentiveness is not always a bad thing.
Right. For sure. So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I'm third grade. It might have been a fireman actually. I
Okay.
remember one time, with my parents' car. This is a fairly vivid memory. That they had to pull over and the fire truck blows by with the sirens and everything, and I go, "Wow, that's pretty cool. It'd be cool on there."
Yeah.
So yeah. So I think that would probably something rather banal like that. I mean, that's a very important career. Don't get me wrong. But it's not a very imaginative answer, but it's the true I think it's the right answer to your
Well,
question.
when I was a kid of the 80s, so I wanted to be with Poncho. I wanted to do chips.
Mm,
That was the
uh-huh.
whole thing. And then as I got older, I saw the redone modern version Cops, and I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm down for that.
Right, right. Well, again, that's an admirable, profession and but obviously a dangerous one and one I wouldn't opt for either. Yeah.
Yeah. So take me back to where you were born and raised and how these seeds of being an educator became who you are. How did all of this evolve into you today?
Okay, well, that's a really good question. And I can give a partial answer, and then I'm going to come back to explain why it's partial. So I was born in Palo Alto, California. And my dad was a graduate student in economics at Stanford. And
Okay.
so that begins to tell you a lot of the answer.
Yeah.
So he was a grad, he was working on his PhD. And when he graduated, he took a job initially at Purdue and then a variety of other jobs, different places, including some overseas stints and so forth. And so um, uh, now, I would say that he inadvertently got me interested in economics. The reason I say that is that when I went to undergraduate, he said to me, major in anything but economics. I don't want people thinking that I kind of forced you into economics. The truth of the matter is, I had a really good econ prof for economic principles, and I decided to be an economics major anyway, despite my dad's. And I don't think that ever became a big deal. I don't think too many people accused me of pressuring, excused him of pressuring me into being an economist. So I think that's it. So we have the two parts, the economics, which is a lot of what I'm still interested in because economics directly or indirectly does have to do with decision making. And then the notion of being a professor, again, it's just more by example. I mean, I just saw, and my dad worked really hard. He arguably a workaholic, but he worked really hard. But there was a lot of schedule flexibility, and we could go on week-long camping trips and so on and so forth. So when I was in graduate school, our joke was you get to pick your 60 hours a week, which means you're going to work, but you don't really have anybody's schedule but your own. Occasionally, you may have to show up and teach a class or two,
Sure.
but generally, if you want to work from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., you can do that, you know.
I find the idea of studying behavior in the economy to be fascinating because it is one of those things that really genuinely rules our life in a way that whether we're cognizant of it or not, it's a motivating factor. How did all of that evolve into a passion for you?
Well, it's interesting. So I started off in, like I said, in economics undergrad, and then I got a master's in economics. And at the time, I was very interested in international finance, international trade, also the flow of capital, money across boundaries, borders, if you will. And at this time, I'd lived overseas with my parents for a while and traveled overseas, so that seemed very natural. And it was kind of by accident. I needed a minor for my PhD, and finance was one of them. And I wandered into a finance class and just said, "Oh my goodness, this is really compelling." Again, a very good teacher. I think we've all been influenced by maybe just a handful of teachers throughout our lives, but uh, and I just thought, "Oh my gosh, this is just fantastic." So I switched over. My PhD is actually in finance. Um, and so I don't, and then, but behind your question is like, why was I intrinsically interested in this? I don't know. Financial markets have always struck me as interesting. I think for my 12th or 13th birthday, my dad gave me some money and said, you can buy a stock, but justify it, go do some analysis or something of that sort. And I think, but I'm guessing he kind of picked up on in some sort of innate interest that I already had. I mean, that certainly spurred it, that opportunity to invest a modest sum. So I don't know. I mean, financial markets are interesting for a number of reasons, but partly because there's human behavior underneath it, in a given financial market. From a research point of view, it's really nice because we have really good data on stock prices, for example. So it's a very compelling discipline in that way. And it just kind of, really there was a spark in that first PhD course in finance that really took off, and pretty much been finance ever since.
Who's been a hero for you, an inspiration in your life?
Well, I could say several people. I think I mentioned my dad just setting a good example. I don't think he ever said be a professor. He certainly never said go major in economics. But I think by example, he was taught me a lot. I think in terms of people who have written, I'm a big fan of Milton Friedman. I don't think he was right on all things, but I think his general approach to markets, not just financial markets, but all markets, labor markets, consumer markets, and so forth. I think he was a very clear thinker, a really brilliant guy. He was at the University of Chicago. There's probably my finance hero, if we want to call Milton Friedman my econ hero, although finance and economics are closely allied fields. But I would say that I would say there was a chap at University of Chicago named Merton Miller, and he had a long and a glorious and productive career. Both he and Milton Friedman were Nobel Prize winners in economics, and he was just, his ability. He was a brilliant guy, but I've seen him in person speak to all kinds of different audiences, kind of like you were saying with the third grader. Like he could tell you what he did to a third grader,
Yeah,
even though he was just like this shockingly brilliant person. And I've
yeah.
seen it. I mean, I've seen him talk to, executives or whatever. And that was inspiring, and that's a gift. And I always strive to try to do that, know my audience, so to speak. And so I'd say those two, kind of as kind of intellectual inspirations, for lack of a better word, stand out in my mind. Yeah.
It's interesting. That really is a skill to be able to explain in layman's terms to people what you do. And I remember reading A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, and he was so smart. It was still highbrow. It's like,
That is first of all, it's a great book.
yeah,
And second of all, I've kind of adopted this when I had PhD students. I said, if you can't explain your research to your parents, you don't really understand it.
yeah,
And that's another feature, right? That when you have to kind of simplify it, you boil it down to the principles and the basics. And if you don't have a grasp of that, then then there's something you need to go back to the drawing board, so to speak. And a variant on that, I'm sorry, to keep on going here.
no, you're good.
With the risk of interviewing a professor. But the other thing is teaching something to someone at any level strengthens your own understanding of it.
Yeah.
So this is a simple example from my own life. I graduated with honors and stuff sorry, I graduated Phi Beta Kappa, but not with honors from my undergraduate. And when I was in grad school, I had to teach a microeconomics class, the first microeconomics, first level one. And throughout that whole semester, especially the first one I'm teaching, I went, oh, I did understand this, but now I really understand this,
Yeah,
almost in a visceral way as opposed to an intellectual way.
absolutely. Did you like Alan Greenspan? Were you a fan of him, of his work?
You know, um, I thought he went a bit overboard on things.
Yeah.
I think there was a thing called I don't want to get too technical, but the Greenspan put, and a put is a type of option, but basically said if the stock market looked like it was tanking, he would loosen up monetary policy. And I think that's not, I think fine tuning the macro economy, the economy as a whole, is actually it's never very accurate. It's never very, and so I think, and then he was, as an acolyte of Ayn Rand, he was a little bit too trusting in markets, I think. Now, having said that, Milton Friedman was a big fan of markets, and generally markets work pretty well. There are exceptions to when markets don't work well, and we need to pay attention to those. But I think, the other thing is, I think he misinterpreted the incentive set up by the financial system at the time. I'm thinking about ultimately the crash of 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
Um, so I think he was called Maestro, but I think he made a number of misjudgments that led to that crash.
I just remember that period when he was in. Anytime he was getting ready to announce something, there was a hush. You could hear a pin drop. You know,
Oh,
it.
trading on the stock market was just like no, like nobody wanted to trade. They were
Yeah.
tuned in. Yeah, absolutely. And he pulled a lot of levers, and for a while he seemed to pull them very well, and so it made sense to pay attention to him. But
Yeah.
in the long run, I don't think history is going to look as fondly on him as when we thought of him as the maestro,
Yeah.
which is the name of a book or the title of a book about him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's been your overarching motivation to do what you do? Because you're educating and giving, and you're what has been that motivation to get up every day and to do this work that you do?
Well, again, first of all, I'd say interaction with students. Although I'm retired, I'm still in touch with a number of my former students. And I'm still in touch with my former colleagues. In fact, I'm still working on some academic papers, which is a lot of fun. And it's funny being a teacher because at least my experience is you have literally, well, over the years, thousands of students. But it doesn't take much. I mean, you just have, and this is kind of, I don't know exactly who your audience is, but boy, oh boy, I let me give some advice to people. If you would take 3 minutes and write an email, you don't even have to get a stamped envelope, write an email to a teacher who you appreciated or really liked or you thought was influential. I will tell you that means more to them than really anything else. And this does not happen frequently. Maybe that's part of why it's so rewarding. But this is not, I don't get these things daily. Sometimes I don't get them weekly. Sometimes I don't get them yearly, but every once in a while you hear a story um, and in fact, one time a friend of mine was working for Goldman Sachs, a big investment banking firm in New York, and he was at a meeting of analysts, and he ended up sitting next to someone who was my former student, and they discovered they both knew me, and that student said, John Howard like changed my life. I wouldn't be in finance except I took his finance course. Now he never got back in touch with me, but my friend was able to relay that. So there are these scattered people out there whose lives you've really changed, and that feels very gratifying, so to speak. Another part of the job, especially at a place like the University of Missouri, is research, and you're trying to advance the boundaries of knowledge a bit. I'm not Merton Miller, I'm not Milton Friedman, so I'm not making they're not big jumps in the contributions I made. Most of my research is behind me. As I mentioned, I'm working on two projects with former colleagues at Mizzou. But that's also gratifying if you think you can uncover something new or, and say a little bit more about the way the world works, which is, well, that's what science is. I mean, there's natural sciences and then there's social sciences. And of course, what I do is mostly in the social science realm, or exclusively, I should say.
Yeah.
But that's also a rewarding aspect to think, oh, man, now we know, now the world knows something, or at least if they would read the paper, knows something that, wasn't known before.
Yeah. It's interesting that teacher comment. My day job is as an IT guy in a school district, and my wife's a teacher. She's a fifth grade teacher. And last year, day after my birthday, we went to a wedding for one of her students, and all of these kids were there that had her and talked to her about glowingly about how she would read. She's really good at getting up and reading stories, and they talked about how instrumental that was. So I've seen that firsthand. Sometimes I'll be waiting in the car and I'm like, she ran into a former student. There's no way she's gone this long, which is great.
No, no, that's great. Yeah, just stay in the car and
Yeah,
wait
that's
because
right.
that is a really rewarding part. And especially if she's, teaching in the public school system, she's not overcompensated. So this is part of the compensation
Yes.
package, so to
Yes, it
speak.
is.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. So what's been one of your best breakthrough moments as a professional, whether it was with a student, the light bulb went on, or research you did that was instrumental in your development? What was that moment in your career where it was like, wow,
Well, I think there are a number of kind of light bulb moments. I mean, it's really nice when you're explaining, especially something fairly complicated, but you're trying to, again, break it down to essentials, to principles, and to, and finally people go, oh, I got it. And you can sometimes just see that on their face if you're in person. Now, one of the tricks to that too is to have two or three ways to explain any one thing. And if I can get off on a little bit of a tangent, there's a thing called the curse of knowledge, which means, like I'm very knowledgeable, let's say, about behavioral economics, and it's very difficult for me, unless I'm self-aware, it's difficult for me to understand what it's like not to know anything about behavioral economics, you know? And the other thing about the curse of knowledge is people become experts because it's a topic that came easily to them. So I see the first time I saw certain topics in finance, I got them. That wasn't a problem. Now, I didn't maybe get them as viscerally as when I taught them, but I still got them. I can get an A on the test.
yeah,
And um, and so, you can explain it the way you got it, but that may not be the way a student got it. So sometimes it's you like, okay, let me approach this from a different angle. And then when you see the light bulb go off, then that is really gratifying. That is
absolutely.
a lot of fun. So, um, in terms, so there was no, to directly answer your question, there was no one specific one of those, but because that is a recurring benefit of teaching, if you teach every semester, every once in a while, that's going to happen. Again, not a frequent event, but happens frequently enough that you think, oh, well, I think I'll keep going,
Yeah.
something like that. So. The other thing, I don't want to get too technical about it, but one of the more on the research side, which you ask about, is so as I said, finance is kind of related to economics, but finance really has its own set of academic journals. And you and many of your listeners may have heard of the phrase publish or perish. And that's where you need to publish, or perish means you might not get tenure, you might have to move. Um, there's also a subfield, I don't know of economics or finance, called real estate. And I know a little bit about real estate because I've got several friends who are really experts in it. And what I'm kind of proud of is I'm one of the few people to have published a real estate paper in a very top high quality finance journal. And I don't think we want to go into the topic there too much. I mean, I could take a stab at it, but and that paper was published in 1988, and it still gets cited today. So it's had a lasting impact. So I find that pretty gratifying. So I,
Yeah.
I think I think that's, if I had to pick one paper, which is kind of a research moment. I mean, it was several years in the making, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think I would go with that one.
So you dispense a lot of wisdom to your students. I'm curious, what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
That's a good question. I think the best advice, and it's come from a variety of sources, but is essentially to slow down, take it easy, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm kind of an achiever. I'm maybe an overachiever. I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm an achiever. I like to get things done. I have to-do lists, everywhere. crossing off things. And, like, you could just kick back. Things aren't going to be much different if you just take a little time to relax or take a deep breath or do a 2-minute relaxation exercise or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's what the reason I think that's a big gift is, I put it into practice several times, at least every day, you know. So I think that's pretty valuable advice, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely it is. Especially as you get older, yeah, you realize there's a lot of things that are going to keep going on, and it's good to have your sanity. That's for sure. So,
Yep. Yep. There's some people may question my sanity, but that's okay. I think they're wrong.
oh,
So
they do the same to me too. So, so everyone out there, there's all these accomplishments that you've pulled in and you've done throughout your life. But what are you the proudest of all the evolution and everywhere you've gone and become? What are you the proudest of?
Well, I'll put, that article that I just mentioned, the real estate article, and it's probably maybe second on the list. What I'm working on now, I didn't intend this as a shameless plug, it's just a plug, but I write a monthly newsletter and people can subscribe to it for free. I mean, you have the option to pay, but there's a free option
Yeah,
when you do that. And it only is monthly, so it's not going to clog anybody's inbox. And I guess I'm not quite answering your question, so you might want to come back to it. But I'm really excited about it because it reaches it doesn't, it's got not gone viral yet, but an increasing number of people subscribe, and you're kind of spreading this knowledge, if not wisdom anyway, to people through this newsletter. And so I think I get compliments every month. I really enjoyed it. I really did. Now there's always a selection bias in that. People who didn't enjoy it rarely email me to say I didn't enjoy it, but although that has happened. So I think that, and then I think kind of the flip side of that coin is it's a topic I'm really interested in, but writing it also, I mean, it's only monthly, so it's not a huge commitment, but it does force me to keep up on things, to keep reading academic articles, and then trying to translate them to this much broader audience. We talked earlier about knowing your audience. And of course, I can't know all of my subscribers, but I assume they're not finance professors, for example. And so there's also the kind of the intellectual enjoyment of thinking of a topic, going and research, going to find out what research has been done on that topic, and then thinking about how you're going to spell it out in a hopefully kind of readable and occasionally funny manner. So that's what I'm most excited about. Your question was about most prideful. I'm not prideful, but the thing I had the most pride in, I think I think the fact that I've just won a boatload of teaching awards. I've taught at 3 schools. I taught at didn't sit well when I got to Mizzou, but I taught at KU first out of grad school, and then I taught at LSU in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and then I did 28 years at Mizzou. I've been retired almost 2 years now, and everywhere I went, I won teaching awards. At LSU and at Mizzou, I won the campus-wide teaching award. At Mizzou, it's called the Kemper Award. Um, and I think that's nice recognition for. I mean, it's something I enjoyed doing.
yeah,
Um, but I think I'm kind of proud of that. And, to be honest, I think as I reflected back the past couple of years, I think the teaching, I got rewarded a lot for research. Research professors, successful research professors tend to get paid better than just teaching professors. And we could, talk about whether that's good for society or not. But I really think overall I have the most pride in my teaching history. Let's call it that.
yeah.
So
So let's get to the essence of you. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, students, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I strive to be, and I hope this answers the question, but you can call me on it. I strive to be, first of all, intellectually curious. That's as I was talking about. That's why I like writing the newsletter. Thinking about writing another book. I'm not sure though. Um, I think intellectual humility is important. I mean, almost all of our knowledge is somewhat contingent and subject to change. So we don't want to be too ardent. You kind of have to pick your degree of ardency. I mean, some things for our normal day-to-day life, theory of gravity works pretty well. There's no reason to question that. And medical news always seems to be changing, right? I mean, was margarine good for you or not margarine not good for you? That's oscillated over the years. So with a sense of intellectual humility and not getting too what am I, too committed to particular viewpoints. Um, Maybe another way of saying that is open-mindedness, something of that sort. So I think that's a part of kind of the academic slash intellectual part of me. Um, I started volunteering actually before I retired, and that's been rewarding. Just kind of giving back in a little bit. And you said earlier I was departing your parting wisdom. And actually, I don't know. Certainly knowledge and hopefully a little wisdom during the office hours or something of that sort. I read a quote someplace, it's not mine, that I'm not sure who it is, but it said wisdom comes not from experience, but from reflecting on experience. And
Yeah.
I like that a lot, because a lot of people have been through a lot of stuff and they still don't seem particularly wise to
Yeah.
me, and so forth. So I think that's part of who I am. And then, I don't know if this is germane to your question, but I play tennis 2 or 3 times a week. Um, um, I I visit my son who lives in St. Louis about once a month. He graduated from WashU and works in St. Louis. So kind of there's father, there's tennis player, there's newsletter writer.
Yeah.
If going for labels as an answer to your question, I think those are important ones.
Yeah.
Volunteer, I'd put volunteer back on that and put that on that list too. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. John, if anyone wants to get your writing, learn more about you, reach out, anything about your world, where's the best place to go?
I think the place I'd start, can I give you two? I'm sorry,
Sure,
Professor.
please.
My website is just JS so that's JSHOWE.com. And it has a bunch of filmed interviews that I've done with people and so forth. My newsletter that I've mentioned is just johnhowe.substack.com. John Howe just run together .substack.com. Again, that's free. You can find a link to that on my website, and you can also find a link to it to my book, which I was published in 2017, but I think still germane. It's kind of personal finance from a behavioral economics point of view. So I guess, if you know where to look, or if you are looking, go to the website and you can find either the newsletter or the book, and you can find a bunch of other material on, and there are no ads, there's no monetary reward for me if you go to my website. So
Excellent. John, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your story. Best of luck with everything.
yeah, thank you so much. I really
Yes, sir.
enjoyed it.
Me too.
Good.
Thank you.